Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our first classical conversation of the 2021-22 season. We know how much our incredible classical supporters and fans of live music love coming to hear Giancarlo speak before concerts. And for the time being, we're so glad to be able to join you virtually a little bit early in the week and preview what's happening this weekend. So please welcome Giancarlo Guerrero, Music Director of the Nashville Symphony. Thanks so much for joining us, Giancarlo.
Always great to see you, Jess.
You too. Before we start, I just want to let you know that if you're joining us live, please go ahead and send us questions in the comments area of however you're watching. We'll get those and get to as many as possible during our conversation. So, Giancarlo, this is actually going to be our second week back with the orchestra. We were outside at Ascend Amphitheater for two programs last weekend. Before we talk about what's coming up, tell us about how it felt to be back with your orchestra last week.
It was incredibly emotional, not only to reunite with my wonderful players in the orchestra, but also with our audience as well. It was a very, very special concert, of course, on Saturday night, and then, of course, last night as well at the amphitheater. But more importantly, after this long hiatus that we were forced to take and where live music basically had to stop, I would say that the most difficult thing for me personally was being away from not only my colleagues, but my friends. And not being able to make music was beyond painful in so many ways. And so, as I said, this last week when we finally were able to come together and play, it was incredibly special and emotional. And you can feel a special energy on stage that we all felt that this was very unique. And we were so grateful for the privilege of being back and playing live music again. And I do know that this is going to be a wonderful beginning for what I know is going to be a fabulous, fabulous season. And one thing I can tell you, it doesn't matter that we didn't play for about a year and a half together. I guess it's like riding a bicycle. The minute that we sat down for that first rehearsal, they sounded as great as they've always done, with incredible discipline that they always bring and professionalism. So that to me was just the icing on the cake. Not only to get to make music, but to truly focus on our ideas of wonderful music making.
Fantastic. Yes, and this weekend we'll be coming home to the Schermerhorn, and it'll be even more special to rejoin our audiences here. So it's been quite a while. I'd like to sort of take a time machine back to when we started working on this season and figuring out how we would come back. Let's go back to sort of our planning time in February and March. And what we were thinking about in building this program and what was important to you for this first time back.
Well, one of the most difficult things, and you will remember this as we started these discussions, is that basically we didn't know how the pandemic was developing. We were hearing good news, and then the next day we were hearing bad news, and it was just going back and forth. And in reality, we really did not know how fast things were going to get better or if things were going to get worse. And even now with this new Delta variant, of course, we thought for a while that things were getting better, but then we kind of hit a brick wall. But it seems once again that things are getting better. So planning, I would say, was the most difficult thing because we really did not know what we were going to be encountering in terms of what size of an orchestra we were going to have. Are we going to be able to have live audiences? I mean, all of these discussions were open. And of course, how can you plan under those conditions? In the end, one thing I knew for sure, I could find music for any conditions.
Correct.
And from that perspective, every time we had music, no, the repertoire is the least of our problems. I mean, fortunately, every great composer wrote music basically for every imaginable occasion, whether it's massive orchestral pieces or small chamber-like pieces. And the fact that we have perhaps one of the greatest concert halls, our beautiful world-class Schermerhorn Symphony Center, this space can basically accommodate anything that we desired. So from that perspective, I have to tell you that that was kind of the easy part once we figure out what we were going to decide. But in many cases, as you remember, there was a lot of guessing going on. We just didn't know how big of an audience, how big of an orchestra.
Yeah.
But in the end, I do have to say that now we are proven to be incredibly almost, I mean, we had a great foresight because
it's very prescient.
That, you know what, we're going to be conservative. We're going to start kind of small with our ensemble. And then as the season progresses and things eventually with vaccination, everything get better, the orchestra will grow as well. And we're now finding out that, I mean, right now in early September, that is the situation. We're not quite out of the woods yet, so we're going to be a little conservative. So the program, particularly in these first concerts, are going to be with reduced ensembles, but trust me, the music is still as gripping as if you were hearing a 300-piece ensemble.
Absolutely. I think, as you said, we really just needed to define the box that we were working within so we could think outside of it and be really creative and create great programs. And I think that's very much what's happening right off the bat here in week one. So let's turn our attention to exactly what you've chosen for this first classical weekend. And I know we have the repertoire to share with everyone as well, starting with this pair of fanfares.
Well, fanfares are all about celebration, of course, and yes, we are celebrating that we are back in our home with our wonderful orchestra and our wonderful audience, and of course, the Copeland Fanfare for the Common Man is by far one of the most famous, recognizable pieces, I think, in the repertoire. Plus, I have to be honest, I actually knew the Copeland Fanfare as the Emerson, Lake and Palmer version. That's how I knew it. It was much later on that I came to realize, oh, it's a classical piece. But I knew it from a record that I had as a young kid that I would play over and over and over again.
Fantastic.
And something about this pandemic that I think we all have to appreciate is the fact that most of the heroes during this pandemic have been common people. People that were either healthcare workers or were transportation workers or were even frontline workers at a grocery store, making sure that we were able to feed our families and provide basic services. So in many cases, for me, both of these pieces celebrate the people that have made it possible for us to be here, that have made all of these great accomplishments, all of these incredible researchers in the medical field that came up with the vaccine so quickly and are continuing to learn how to treat COVID patients. So both of these pieces, because of the titles, celebrate, I think, the real heroes of this pandemic and have allowed us to be here. So the Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland is from 1942, and originally it was written at a time during World War II and commissioned by Eugene Goossens, who was the music director of the Cincinnati Symphony. And he had done a project during World War I when he was in London of commissioning all of these fanfares to open every concert during World War I to basically rally up the people and, get some patriotism going. So when he became music director in Cincinnati 30 years later, he kind of copied the same idea and commissioned actually 18 different fanfares to open the concerts during wartime. And again, to rally everybody and get a sense of patriotism. Of those 18 fanfares, by the way, Copeland's Fanfare for the Common Man is the only one that is left. The other ones really did not turn to be, I don't think, as special. And the title is quite unique because Goossens actually asked Copeland to give it something of a very inspiring or patriotic or militaristic name. And he thought of the Fanfare for Freedom or the Fanfare for the Navy. And in the end, he had heard a speech by the Vice President Henry A. Wallace. And in that speech, a very famous speech, by the way, he talked about the century of the common man. And Copeland said, that's it. That's the title of my piece. I want to celebrate the common man. And by a thing of just coincidence, the premiere took place on March 12 of 1943, which back then, by the way, was tax day. And Copeland said, what better way to celebrate the common man than during tax time? Fast forward to 1987, and American composer Joan, with whom we have a relationship here in Nashville, and we've recorded some of her music in the past. Recently, she turned 80 years old. She's one of my dearest and most favorite people in the world. In 1987, there was another fanfare project done by the Houston Symphony Orchestra, and she was commissioned to write the piece. And in a nice little homage to Copeland, she wrote the Fanfare for the Uncommon Woman. And out of that, actually, she's written 6 of them. This is the first one. And the piece is dedicated to women that are adventurous and who take risks. And interestingly enough, the first dedicatee of that first fanfare was Marian Alsop, who has become perhaps the most recognizable female conductor in the world. Back, of course, in 1987, the sight of watching a woman conductor was quite unusual. We've gotten better nowadays. We're still not quite there, but Marian Alsop really was the first of these that became very recognizable and very appropriate to have her as the first dedicatee. And interestingly also, Joan orchestrated the piece exactly the same way as the Copeland. So they both kind of work together well. It's only percussion and brass. That's it. And both of them are about 3 minutes long. They almost have the same length. So what a great way to not only celebrate what we're hoping is coming to be the end of this pandemic, but in a great way, celebrate the common man and the uncommon woman who have made it possible for us to be here.
I think that's great. Thank you. The next piece on our program, I mean, Dvořák's really a specialty, and his symphonies are always favorites. But this is certainly a piece that's very popular and known, and our musicians have played. However, it's the kind of piece that rarely makes it into a subscription program, but is as delightful as anything Dvořák fans may be familiar with. So what do you love about this and the featuring of our wind players?
Well, I think that this pandemic has created opportunities, as you mentioned. This is a piece that it is, in my personal book, one of my absolute favorites. I've known this piece for as long as I can remember. But when we were working before the pandemic, I guess we got into this normal state of programming where we were only thinking of the orchestral larger pieces, and pieces like this, which deserve to be there, we just never thought of them. And then fast forward, we're in pandemic times, and all of a sudden we have to think smaller. So this has opened the door, I think, to bring pieces that deserve to be part of concerts, as well as the larger symphonic works that we're used to. And I always think of that idea that it's not only coming back to normal, it's coming back to something better than normal. And I think in many ways, as institutions, the Nashville Symphony will lead the way in making sure that our programming keeps expanding, not only from the stuff that we normally associate with symphonic music, but beyond. And in that many ways, I think we're going to be able to attract more and more audiences and make people feel more connected to the symphony orchestra. This piece, by the way, as I said, it's interesting because it's a very small complement. It's only woodwinds with 3 French horns and the unusual addition of 1 cello and 1 bass. And to know about this piece, you have to understand that wind music, particularly at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, was immensely popular in Europe, especially because this was outdoor music. This was party music. In the days back then when they would have parties outdoors with drinks and everything, particularly amongst royalty, they would have a wind band. And you needed wind bands because outdoors you could hear them much better. Sometimes a couple of string quartet might have been hard, especially if you're too far away, having a chat with a friend. So wind serenades became very popular. Mozart, by the way, wrote quite a few of them. And in many ways, Dvořák uses the same kind of template that Mozart did, which is basically like a symphony. It's a 4-movement piece. They are much longer, and they are intended in many ways also to showcase the wind instruments, which, by the way, in the late 18th century and early 19th century, were still getting developed. I mean, violins, cello, string instruments were very much established, but clarinets and oboes and bassoons were instruments that were still being developed and getting better. And the fact that this music was written to be very virtuosic made those instruments much, much better, and instrumentalists able to catch up. And that allowed Beethoven and Schumann and Mahler and everybody else to write more virtuosic and get the music that we now cherish. Something else that you have to know about this Serenade, which is from 1878, by the way, is that we would not have any of this without Johannes Brahms, who was at the time very well known. And Dvořák was a very young composer coming out of Bohemia, actually, what is now the Czech Republic. And Johannes Brahms became so impressed by him that actually told his publisher, you either take this guy or I am walking away. And we really owe it to Johannes Brahms and his commitment to new music. Remember, all music was new. This young composer, he put his own reputation and say, you have to take this guy and publish his music because it deserves it. And this was one of his favorite pieces. One of the first pieces that was commissioned was this Serenade for Winds. And Johannes Brahms, there's a letter that he wrote to his good friend Joseph Joachim, who was a great violinist, for whom he wrote the violin concerto and his double concerto for cello and violin, which, by the way, we're playing in the Nashville Symphony later in the season. He actually wrote him a letter and said, oh, you need to listen to this Wind Serenade by Dvořák. It's the most beautiful thing on earth. But then there is this little time capsule that he said, you have to get people to play it for you. And it puts you for a second to stop and say, yeah, I guess back then in 1879, 1880, if you wanted to hear a piece, you had to get real players to do it for you. And Brahms is telling Joachim, you know what, find a bunch of your friends, give them the music, and then have them play it for you, maybe in your living room or something. And I promise you, not only are you going to love it, but your players, more importantly, are going to adore playing it. And I have to give you another little bit of information. This piece has been requested in the past by a few of my players in the Nashville Symphony. This is one of the favorite pieces for musicians to play because it's not only virtuosic, but it's a lot of fun to do.
Yes.
It's a great challenge. It's immensely rewarding. 4 movements. First movement is a march, very much like the Serenades of Mozart. Begins with a march, loud. Again, you're supposed to be outdoors. The second movement captures a little bit more of that Dvořák Bohemian Czech background, and it's actually a Czech dance in 3/4, which eventually becomes a much faster dance. And so there's a lot of folk music in this. The third movement is slow and beautiful and lyrical. And then the fourth movement, as you would expect, it's a polka. Polka that keeps coming back and back and back and gets faster and faster and faster. And as I said, even thinking about it right now, it is so much fun. And so I am delighted that we're getting to play this beautiful piece of music in our beautiful hall for a great audience. And I know that in the future, we're going to be exploring a little bit more of these little gems, wonderful gems that deserve to be part of the standard or orchestral repertoire.
Great. I can't wait. Fantastic. So we've covered brass and percussion. We've covered winds and a couple string players. Then we have a real string feature in Jessie Montgomery's Strum.
So as we are listening to this music, and by now you may have figured out what's going on right now. We're basically almost building the orchestra like a Lego, like blocks in a Lego. It's just literally we start with the brass and percussion, then we move next to the woodwinds, and now we're going to move to the front, the string section. And again, this is all part of the logistics that we knew were going to be part of the current health protocols. You know, making sure that we had room for us to distance. And I wanted to almost, after this long time, to kind of in front of the audience, little by little. It's like almost like an education concert. So we start here, and then we put this here, and now we're moving forward with the strings. Something that has been, I think, another, I guess, positive thing. We have to look for positive things in the middle of all of this craziness. Is the fact that all of a sudden, all of us traveling musicians had a little bit more time in our hands and had a little bit more time at home, and maybe surfing a little too much on the internet. So this was a perfect time for me to kind of go and research a little bit more about composers that I either knew about and listen to their music, have the time to listen to the music and find what things may work for our season. And especially the idea that orchestras nowadays are making a real concerted effort, including the Nashville Symphony, of inclusivity, of commissioning and programming and playing music by underrepresented composers, female composers, African-American composers, Hispanic composers, doesn't matter. It seems that for a while we were kind of getting into this just circle of the same old repertoire, and having the time to research further, I think is going, as I said before, expand the repertoire. And Jessie Montgomery is one of these composers that I think deserve to be a regular part of concerts anywhere around the world. I had known about Jessie. She's a wonderful violinist and composer, attended the Juilliard School of Music, and I had known her because of her work with the Sphinx organization, which is out of Detroit. And for a couple of decades now, this is an organization that has been fighting and working very hard to get underrepresented parts of our community into symphony orchestras and into our world. And this, of course, especially has been very positive for African-American musicians, as well as Latin and Hispanic musicians as well. So I had known about Jessie and about her work, but really, again, because of that time constraint of being always on the road and everything, I really did not know many of her pieces. So I went online, checked a few, and this piece that I chose is actually for strings only, called Strum. And I think the title says it all. So the strings really begin strumming, playing what we call pizzicato with their bows down. And the music sounds very folksy, rhythmically very, very challenging, very dance-like. And it's about a, 8-minute piece. It's not that very long, but the piece really develops wonderfully from this almost folk-like strumming strings into this very, very fast and virtuosic writing for the instrument. Very, very tricky piece, but like the Dvořák, a lot of fun to play. it's a piece that when you see the players on stage, you're gonna see that joy because it's a piece that really gets you going, and in many ways almost makes you forget, about the seriousness of classical music. No, you can have fun playing the cello, and you can have a lot of fun playing the viola. And I think the fact that Jessie herself is a wonderful violinist, she's able to translate all the great knowledge into the rest of the ensemble. And this is my first time conducting the piece. And by the way, I am so much in love with this piece that I'm actually doing it 3 or 4 more times, including in Europe, because I know this piece deserves to be played. And this, I think, is part of what I said before, this concerted work that we are all having to do of including more people from different backgrounds into the reality of what is a symphony orchestra. And I think by doing that, we will all gain quite a lot.
Yeah, great. Well, it's going to be wonderful to hear this for the first of many times. I'm glad you're taking it elsewhere, and a wonderful way to come out of the Dvořák. So to close the program, then you've chosen, it's maybe a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek honorarium looking back, bringing the full orchestra together for their first symphony in the hall, which is Schubert's Symphony in B minor, which of course we call unfinished with its 2 movements.
I still remember that Thursday rehearsal we were having with the orchestra in early March of 2020. And I still remember having that rehearsal in the morning, and then we had a rehearsal that afternoon, and then the general manager coming in and saying, "Oh, Giancarlo, there's something going on with this new virus, and we're canceling this afternoon's rehearsal, but we'll be back tomorrow, of course, for the morning rehearsal, and of course, the weekend concerts will go on." We were so naive, literally the world shut down, literally. I mean, without any warning, we hit literally a brick wall. I remember that vividly. And of course, what came after, "Oh, no, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks."
Exactly.
And then, "Oh, no, but we're able to close our season." And okay, well, at least we're going to play a summer season. We'll maybe open the 2021 season. And we now know what the world had in store for us. So there was a lot of unfinished business, And this symphony, which is very famous because of its title, and if you've ever watched a Smurfs episode,
I was just going to say the Smurfs.
Classical music. Listen, if you've seen any cartoons, classical music. I tell this to people. I know all my classical music from Bugs Bunny. That's where I know all my classical music. It's later on, or Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I even told the audience when we did Beethoven 5 on Saturday night that, he was turning to a disco song. I mean, that's how good that music is. I mean, somebody has to keep copying it and reinventing it. But this symphony, as I said, like you said, a tongue-in-cheek, unfinished. We're trying to catch up to where we were. And like what happened during the flood in 2010, we don't cancel anything. We just postpone. And right now, that's what we're doing. We don't cancel. This city is too strong for us to just say, "Oh, we're giving up." No, everything is just being moved and postponed until it is the right moment, whether from the healthcare protocol or from programming issues. Everything that we had promised, we will bring back at some point. That's just who we are, because we plan these things, as you know, years in advance. There is a journey that we're all taking together with our community in the way that we present all of our concerts. So, first of all, the famous unfinished symphony of Schubert, we don't know the reason for the unfinishedness of it all. We don't. There are many, many different conspiracy theories of why he did not finish it. Normally, a symphony has 4 movements. Well, this one has 2, the first and the second one. We do know that he started working on a third. And he wrote it basically in piano form. He did not orchestrate it. And then he wrote 8 measures of the last movement. This is 1822. I had a record, I remember when I was a child, by the Boston Symphony and Kusevitsky. And the record, the cover was this piece of paper that had an inkwell and a little pen, and it had some roses with petals falling down. That kind of gave you the idea that, oh, well, he didn't get to finish it because he died. And I always thought that was the obvious reason. He did not finish it because, you know what? He didn't get to. He probably died. And by the way, Schubert was one of those composers like Mozart that died early. He died at 31, very young. But then as I started researching, no, he actually went on to live another 8 years almost and wrote another symphony, which became known as number 9. So, of course, I was curious, like, so what happened? In reality, we don't know. There are many ideas. The one that I think might have been that makes the most sense, the logical one, is that probably he wrote these 2 movements, started writing on the third, and then another project came about. He focused on that. We do know that he got a commission to write a ballet called Rosamunda, and then he wrote that. And then after that, he probably just totally forgot. That can be as easy that he started writing this, and then he moved on to another, and then unfortunately he died 8 years later. The piece, as I said, we know those 2 movements were written in 1822. He died in 1829, and 1831, and the piece was not premiered until 1865. So more than 40 years, almost 40 years after he died, the piece was finally premiered. And the reason is that many people did not know that it actually existed. Right. A couple of brothers apparently had the copy of this. How these brothers got a copy of the score, we don't know. We just know that they convinced another conductor to program it, and he did it. They did it in Vienna. And by the way, the title Unfinished, again, it was just kind of given by the audience themselves. We started knowing about the Unfinished Symphony around 1890. That's when we first know, but that was not given by Schubert, of course. And like many famous pieces, we know them by their title, whether it's the Miracle Symphony or the Drumroll Symphony, or in this case, the Unfinished Symphony. So you get 2 incredible movements, and from my personal opinion, you don't need anything more. 2 movements are more than perfect, and in many ways, as we listen to this, I hope that we will reflect on all of that time that we've been kind of locked up, and it is time to catch up where we left off and keep going and continue in doing what we do best, which is bringing great music to Nashville.
I wholeheartedly agree. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to get together and look ahead to the week and join some of our friends. And we look forward to seeing you walk out Thursday night with the orchestra. So everybody have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.